Hey everybody, welcome to the 22nd installment of an Isaiah Desta Conversation. Today is a special episode because we have my grandma with us, Grandma Bea.
Hi.
So yeah, this is going to be a special episode, not like any others. This is just basically going to be a story time episode.
Okay.
So,
All right.
fire off.
Well, what would you like for me to talk about myself?
Well, first, for people who don't know you, just tell them a little bit about yourself, like what time period you come from.
Okay, I was born in 1933, and I was the third of four children, and I enjoyed where we lived. It was a large three-story house, with full basement, and there were just a lot of interesting things about the house itself.
It was a student housing, right?
Well, it was a student center
Okay.
for Baptist preference students on campus. And my dad needed some extra income to help get started in Iowa City. And so renting rooms to students was something that was needed. And we lived very, very close to the campus, the main campus.
Yeah.
And
What school was this?
the University of Iowa.
Ooh, Hawkeyes.
Yeah.
Look at you.
Yeah. And I was always a very social kid. And so...
You're a social grandma, too.
Oh. Well, yeah, I think that is probably thanks to my bringing up in the setup, the arrangement and so on, that where I was.
So you said it was a three-story house?
Yes, it had been built according to the design of a man who had come there from New York as a pastor, and he had New York ideas about things.
Build up, not out.
Yeah.
That's clever.
Uh-huh.
Actually, I agree. I think, because, population is rising. I saw this one thing that was super cool. All the people in the world could fit inside of Texas. Yeah. So it's all about how you organize a city. I think even though sea levels are rising, it's gonna be all right because humans, first of all, they're smart, they're innovative. I think they're just gonna realize, oh, look how many people fit in New York versus Kansas. Let's evolve Kansas, maybe. Maybe let's build Kansas upwards instead of outwards, and then I think people will be able to fit. But like you said, yeah. The three-story house. How many people live there generally?
I can't remember right off, but we rented rooms. My dad's salary was very low, but our living arrangements were marvelous, and so by renting rooms to students, he augmented the family income, and that was helpful.
Were you born there? Like in that area at least?
I
don't mean like were you born in the house?
I was born in Iowa City.
So you were born in 1933. That's about like 4 years after the Depression began, right?
I don't remember
the crash of 1929, right? It was like Black Tuesday. I think that's what they called it.
Okay.
And then you were born in 1933, so that's 4 years after. But the Depression lasted for 10 years, right? So.
Okay, now in
That's
our
6 years.
area, let me interject. It was not greatly affecting us.
Really?
It was an agricultural area, and Iowa's soil was extremely rich, and
And the Dust Bowl didn't affect you guys either.
no, not at all. And so a river ran through the university town area, and it was rising on hills on either side, and that made for some beauty and also for interest in terms of development.
So Iowa wasn't hit hard by the Depression.
No, it really wasn't.
That's a blessing. Keep in mind, you were only... How old were you? You were 6 when it ended. So you may not have been, like, perceptive to lifestyle.
Well, I liked to listen to adults talk. And so I very often knew things that I didn't really understand.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And So, but it was a really marvelous place for me to grow up, and for all of us. There were four Dirk's children eventually, and well, in fact, by that time there were four of us, and the educational center was second to only Stanford in California.
Harvard.
No, not that.
Really?
Stanford and the University of Iowa were the schools that did the research for early testing for intelligence, and it was
like early education, or what do you mean by early testing for intelligence?
Oh, it was early historically. It was some of the very first. The Stanford Binet tests were the University of Iowa
tests.
And Stanford University in California.
Okay.
Collusion. So it was a very, very stimulating place to live. And the university education department had an experimental school just right there then. And so we went to school from what was called junior primary, and this was kindergarten in other areas, and it was a very, very stimulating environment. And I lived there, went through the university schools, went away my freshman year in college to a small school in California. Did not like it at all. It was like a fifth year of high school.
Oh,
but I wanted to get away. And, I'd been in one place. And so anyway, I came back my second year and graduated from there.
What'd you study?
Education was my thing. I really
grew up in education.
Well, and I always dreamed I would play that I was being a school teacher. And I had an easel blackboard.
An easel? What is it?
It could fold up flat and go against a wall, for instance, or it could fold out like a teepee, and I could do lots of things on there. And so it gave Mother more freedom when I was at those ages where I needed, so she could hear me just around the corner, and
teaching lessons.
Yeah, making it all up. And
listen, settle down. Nobody's there. It's just you and her.
Yeah, she said that when I forget how old, at church one Sunday, a teacher was not able to get into her class, and so they asked me if I would take the class, and the kids thought, boy, we're going to get away with murder. Well, I had been teaching in an imaginary class for a long time, and I wasn't about to have kids, run me around. So I really did have fun with that, and I did become an elementary school teacher, and I very much enjoyed that, and I felt that I brought some kind of liveliness to the area where I went.
When all the stories I've heard you tell out about, or when you started teaching in Oklahoma.
Yes.
You want to tell the people a little bit about that?
This school happened to be in an area which happened to be very much according to routine, and I just wasn't going to join that part because I had some other experiences and had come from another part of the country. And so, for instance, I remember I was talking to the kids because they weren't used to my more rapid speech, and I thought it was very, very important that they become at ease with my voice. And so I can remember at one point a girl raised her hand, and she said, when are we going to pass out the books? And I said, oh, we can do that right this minute. And I wanted to show them that we didn't have to do things according to A, B, C,
Yeah.
D, 1, 2, 3, 4. And so, anyway, we passed out the books, and then I said, now, what would you all like to do? Maybe you don't want to listen to things. They said in almost en masse, we want to hear you tell more about the way you grew up.
Yeah.
And that's really one of the ways to make children the most relaxed. If they've had bad school experiences before, if they know a lot about you, how you sound, how you deal with them, and so on. And I wasn't doing any of this. Get out your book, so and so, turn to page so and so, and none of that. I just wouldn't have it. And
Quality teacher.
What?
Quality teacher, quality grandma.
Well, if I had not used the experience that I had, which was so unusual at that time in this country, and so I was really glad to have this opportunity. And when I told the kids, I said, I've been going to school in Tahlequah to get a master's.
Tahlequah?
It was a town south of us, and it was where a college was located. And I said, I've been going there in the evenings, that's true, but the way that if kids are used to finding out that you speak truly and knowledgeably, then you can have a big influence on their attitude toward having new experiences.
Sure.
And that was very, very important to me.
Maybe now they'll expect from their teachers what you provided, and that'll change the culture.
Gradually.
Yeah.
And I said, we don't learn just when we walk in school. We're learning every moment of our lives. And so spending time out in nature is very valuable. And then I asked them, I said, how many of you like to get outside and just look around and so on? And they said, well, when we're permitted to.
Oh.
And I began to realize that there was a lot of regulation. And there was some good reason behind that, and we don't need to go into all of that. But it was, I wanted to have...
It was limiting.
Mm-hmm, I wanted to have a free, open classroom, and that if they felt like saying something, that all they needed to do was to raise their hand so that I knew that they wanted to say something. And if it was sort of off the subject, I said, well, why don't we write that on the board and then come back to it when we're more ready to develop another idea? If
you were around today in today's early education, you'd be just embarrassed. The way it's being run is really on a school-wide basis or a state-wide basis. There's now federal curriculum that is passed out to schools that, like, all the states in America that are public, I mean, the schools in the states that are public, right, have to do these things. So they have to do this, have to do that. Recess is this long, it's this often. And especially in Florida, when I was in elementary school here, it was horrible. Like, we would get one recess a week, I think, for like 30 minutes. It was horrible. And they just jam.
That does not make good sense with human growth and development.
No, it doesn't. And that's why the Florida school system is lacking. It's poor. It really is.
I think that people that go into, want to make their career as educators are people with good intent. And so as long as there's a free flow of information, then I think we don't need to feel discouraged about a system that doesn't seem to have found quite its strength yet. And
what do you think the importance of school systems are?
I think that building optimism in the minds of youngsters is one of the most wonderful things that can be accomplished wherever it is accomplished. And so well, I can remember at the 9-week, first 9-week period, instead of sending home report cards, the parents were to come and pick up the report card and have a 15-minute visit with the teacher. And one woman came by and she said, "I've been dying to meet you." Yeah. She said, Chris used to always come up with a sore throat or something else. He just did not like coming to school. And now, if he has a sore throat, he goes to school anyway. And I said, well, to me, if I didn't pass on the wonderful experiences that I had in Iowa City at the university experimental schools, and Stanford University and the University of Iowa were the two earliest educational institutions that were devising things. And so it was a marvelous place to grow up. And I loved my work. And the kids.
You're awesome.
Oh, thank you. Well, people that are loved in their own upbringing have a different self-concept than children who are ignored or abused or worse. And some children are actually more fortunate to be ignored if they have a very unhealthy family environment. But
nobody seeks to be ignored, though.
Yeah, true. Well, some children wanted to be there, but they wanted to kind of hide. And so I think that is genuine need. And so I didn't pull on kids at certain times to call on them. And I just don't think that's, well, the teacher needs to work harder than that requires.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I loved my early career, and it was something that I think I was kind of born toward.
I like the idea of, teaching people things, but I don't necessarily want to be a teacher. I don't want to say that, but recently I've had this idea that I wanted to start like a school and make it so that the curriculum makes sense, and make it so that teachers have some freedom within their own classes. Obviously, it'd have to be a private school because you can't do these regulations when it's public. And how would it be funded otherwise? But yeah, and like the ideas that you're telling me now about like kids feeling that optimistic feeling, like I think that's important. And I mean, how do you implement that? Do you just hire people who bring that to the table? There's really no other way to instill it. You can't like put a banner up that says be optimistic. That's not gonna work. Like you have to have people who actually make the kids feel some way. People like you.
Well, to value the youngsters and so on, I think it comes across. They know that they are important to you and to the whole scene. And there were children who, well, I'll give you a story about a little fellow whose name was Danny Quayle. And he must have been really ignored or abused or both at home. And he was a problem to me. And when it came time for us to have a school trip at the end of the year, which was something that I insisted on, we had members of our church who owned a marvelous acreage, large tract of land in a hilly area, and they wanted, the reason they got it was that they had never had children, and they wanted to influence the appreciation of youngsters for nature, because we lived in such a beautiful area of northeast Oklahoma. And anyway, I don't know where I was going with that.
Danny Quayle. You're talking about Danny Quayle.
Yeah. You know, I wished that he would be sick. I've never had this feeling before, but he was such a thorn in the flesh that I thought...
That's as dark as the pod is going to get, guys.
Wow. If he comes to this, it's likely to just, I don't know.
Muddy it up.
You know, it was the best thing that we could have ever done for Danny Quayle. And he was there, and he was just saying, Mrs. Wilson, Mrs. Wilson, Mrs. Wilson, Mrs. Wilson. And the kids were going like this. He was just enthralled. It was as if he had never had the chance to be free in the country.
Some kids just can't function in a classroom. So I think he functioned better outside, and maybe that's why.
Optimally well, I would agree. But I think that's the problem for adults, is to make the classroom
right
a welcoming place. And well, one Mark Monkton, his mom said when she
Mark
came,
what?
Monkton was his
Monkton.
last name.
Wow.
And when his mom came for the first parent-teacher thing in place of a report card at that time.
Yeah.
And she said, I've been dying to meet you. She said, Mark used to think of any excuse to be sick and to have to stay home from school. Now, even if he's starting to get a cold or has one, he says, I gotta get up and get dressed. I gotta get to school. And I said, well, that doesn't happen from just one person. That you convey something by eye contact, you convey it by the tone of your voice, but most of all, you handle it as if the children are the most important thing, not the textbook, not your voice, not any of that. Them. If the children were not there, there would be nothing to do.
You really have a heart of a counselor.
Yeah.
You became a counselor later or before that?
Later. It was a master's degree. And yes, I wanted very much to have that. And I can remember when I said something about I'm going to be moving, and the kids said, just to where are you going to move? You know, the worry was written all over their faces. And I said, well, I've been going to Tahlequah, which you know, to get a master's degree, and that's so that I can be a school counselor. And we have school counselor already here, and so I'm not...
One school counselor was planning for the whole school?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
The high school I went to
Uh-huh.
had 2,000 kids, I think, and we had 4 counselors.
Yeah. And even that was probably...
beyond insufficient.
Yeah.
Beyond. Like,
yeah.
They were relegated to doing mostly paperwork, and in order to see them, you had to, like, wait weeks, months. Like, it was horrible.
Oh, that's...
Terribly disorganized.
Oh. Well, if you have to wait that long to see them, then basically the program just is not well planned.
No, it's not working.
Not at all. Oh, goodness, that's distressing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why I say I want to make a school, because schools are
Yeah.
not run properly.
Yeah.
They're done poorly. Maybe private schools are run better. I can imagine they would, because, you know...
No, I don't agree.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Why is that?
Because in public schools, the input and the feedback flows more easily and readily. And in private schools, that has to do pretty much with ownership.
Well, yeah, that's another thing. Is like a public school has basically how it's run dictated prior, and the student body and what's the name, the parents can affect what happens, right? In a private school, it's actually, I don't even know if that's true. In a private school, I would think there'd be more autonomy. Wouldn't you say? Because you're paying the school, so you should have say in what they do.
Well, the should very isn't always the case. And,
Well, in a basic economy, if you have value, you can do more things with your value. So if your value is that you're paying a tuition to the private school, then I'm sure that they would allow you to have more say in what happens. Wouldn't you think?
am not in favor of making the private school more important than the public school.
Well, not necessarily more important, but maybe it functions better. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm not advocating for private schools to be like deemed as better. Well, I mean, I think they're better. Let me rephrase that. I think they have potential to be better. They also have potential to be worse. Now, if let's say I'm the owner of the school, I'm the person who dictates whether or not the school does better or does worse.
Yeah, I believe in public education, and when the community itself has the voice about how things are run, the school board, for instance, mm-hmm. then if things are not going well, then I would say that the school board is not doing its job.
Well, you could say it's almost the opposite, because public schools today are run by the state, damn near. Like, the curriculum is preset. There's nothing you can really do to determine what the teachers have to teach, because they have mandatory standardized exams at the end of the year that they have to prepare the kids for. And if the kids don't pass that exam, they don't pass. So I would say there's less control in a public school, because in a private school, there's things like you need for college acceptance, like SAT. But aside from that, they don't need to take the standardized exam. Well, at least I don't think they do. I don't think private school kids have to take the same standardized exams as public school kids. So in a sense, they have more autonomy. Mm-hmm. Now, let's say that private school makes it so that there's no school board and they are the god of whatever happens at the school. I think that's a poor idea. Now, like what you said, you could have a school board at a private school. You would just have to implement that. It wouldn't be necessarily mandatory. So, you know.
I believe in public education, and it's not that there shouldn't be private. It's just that there should be some system that's available to all.
Oh, you know,
because if we don't learn early in our lives to live in a democratic organization of communities, then I don't think we have much of a chance of developing it later. And that aspect was extremely important to me, and it was, well, I never would have wanted to have taught in a private school.
I'm trying to think of some way, to run a school in a way that the kids, even poor kids, would be able to go and get a genuinely intense, great education there.
May I suggest that the first step in achieving that is to have a public that's informed mm-hmm. and is excited about the potential for growth in that area, and to go into the hands of a few and so on, it means that there are a lot of people being left out, and I am very much against that.
Well, I mean,
public
in a
education
sense,
is a mighty thing.
I was thinking maybe if you get all the parents of, let's say, a certain neighborhood to commit whatever portion they can to the school, and then they can dictate exactly how it's run, that might be the best system.
Well, I don't like the term dictate.
Somebody has to dictate something, and if all the parents are involved, then I think that's a great way.
If we're going to live under a system of government that basically starts with the education of the citizen, so that the citizen at a particular age becomes a person that knows how to research, knows how to take information and sift it through their mind.
People my age are mostly incapable of doing those things.
Oh, that's sad.
It is.
That is sad.
It's also
because that's when people who are dictatorial in their approach have a
keep in mind, the world has become significantly more complicated, concentrated. What am I saying?
Yeah.
Because of the internet, and these things are getting jumbled up. Like you don't know what's fact, what's fiction. It can become very confusing. Not to mention, schools have become lazy, and they're focusing on things that are kind of unreasonable. Like they're trying to teach kids to do intense math that's above their skill level at a certain age, thus discouraging them from continuing math, right? But yet they don't teach them how to critically think when they're young. And now they're introducing it in like high schools and trying to get kids to critically think. But
That's too late.
But they're, actually, I don't know. Yeah.
Better late than never.
But my point is, they only do that in AP Capstone, which is which is a program for like really smart kids, and these are kids that go to college, right? I had the potential to do AP Capstone. I didn't do it because it looked too rigorous. I did not want to do that. From what I've heard, AP Capstone is more difficult than college, as far as I can tell, because they give you the same amount of work college has, but you have so much more time in school, and you need to do the work all the time. Like it's really excessive. In college, you have a lot of break. Whatever. I'm going off on a tangent. My point is, the whole public isn't receiving this critical thinking treatment. They're not taught how to critically think. They're not at all. So the majority of our public is lacking. They don't understand how to analyze the news, how to research whether or not some things are true or not. Like,
I would say, can I interject?
Yeah,
I would say that it depends on the location. Because we had school boards in rural areas in Iowa when I was young that were inferior, and kids came to the university not well prepared. But the university had known that for a long time, and so they were prepared to meet that eventuality, and it mattered a great deal.
The cities have lost their prestige, I would say. So very much so. Big cities now, a large swath of their population is just not getting the education necessary. Like ghettos in Chicago, ghettos in New York, all these poor neighborhoods in big cities are not getting proper education whatsoever. Like, it's really poor.
Whatsoever is too broad, because there are educators who are devoted to that.
Well,
kind of thing.
There's teachers who slip through those cracks. There's parents that slip through the cracks, and there's students who slip through the cracks who end up being good students, being good teachers, and being good parents. But for the most part, the school system is very much so lacking. Like it's really not doing well, and that's one of the main reasons I wanted to start
with the system.
A school.
Then I would say,
because the system is too. I think it's too centralized. I think you need to allow schools to run themselves, because on such a large scale, you can't predict what problems this school will have versus this school, and if they both have the same prescription. Like, let me give you an analogy. So, let's say there's one doctor and 80 patients. He prescribes one medication. Or she, sure. But this is just an example. The doctor prescribes medication to 80 of the patients. It's all the same medication, but they all have different problems or different diseases. That's not going to help anybody. But if one doctor addresses one patient and another doctor addresses another patient, then each patient is going to probably, or more likely, going to get the proper prescription. So the analogy I make is for this reason. I think schools should be able to run themselves because they'd be able to better prescribe what they need in order to solve their own problems. Now, here comes the problem, funding. How do you fund a school like that when it's not centralized by a big bad, right? Like a big person at the top in the government or whatever the case may be. It has to be private. You know, that's just my sense of what it is, you know, like I think private schools they have the potential to operate better. At least that's my belief.
Okay, but private is the opposite of public. And so if we're going to have the public at large having only to be living in a particular area in order for the youngsters to be able to attend a particular school, then that that's a public matter.
Okay, well then I'd have to figure out a way to change public schools. But I don't understand. I don't see how I could do that because of all the regulation. And because the regulation is centralized, I'd have to go to where it's centralized. And let's say this. Let's say I wanted to deregulate this school. Let's call the school Vikings Meadow. That was random. Whatever. Mm-hmm. Let's call that school that. And that school has the same regulation as all 80 other schools in that state. Let's say that. If I try to deregulate Vikings Meadow, then I'm, in turn, deregulating all the other schools.
Okay, could I suggest that instead of using the term deregulate, take it and function within the given system and find your way to express yourself and your ideas within that.
Because it would help more kids, you're saying?
Oh, yes, and it develops, it takes you and puts you in a learning curve.
That's a good point. That is a good point. I think there's a space for both of the things that you pose to me and what I pose to you. I think there is a space for a private school that is run to perfection. I also think there's space for working from the inside and fixing public schools. I think of the two, what you said was actually a really, really, really good point, because the people that have changed me in my life have been public school teachers. Like in senior year, Brent Urbanik, he was my psychology teacher. Whew, he changed the way I thought so much. He was really a blessing. Miss Rogers, junior year. So she's so smart, so all over the place. She made me love art, you know? People like that are inside the public school system can change the way you think. Like, they matter a lot. You know? Actually, that's a really good point. I think you changed my mind. I think you changed my mind a little bit. I still want to make my own school. Because I know it's a little selfish, but when I'm gone, I want to have a legacy left behind. And I want that legacy to be something that'll last forever. Like, I always tell Gabby, I'm like, one day I want to build a house, an estate, the Desta estate. Like, I really want to do that and have it last for centuries, hopefully. Or even longer, maybe. It depends what I build it out of. Carbon fiber or something. I don't know. But I want it to last, you know? And I think building a school or creating a school or a system, maybe, that works better than something we have now, you know? Maybe that'll work. Maybe that'll help.
I think that change comes in the public school system, which I'm very, very much for. We can't have a democracy without having a very, very vital public education system.
Yeah,
and
that's true.
From the preschool through the PhD regimen, and
you think it should be public all the way through to PhD?
The availability of that should be there.
Well, the availability is always there if you can afford it. You know what I mean?
Okay, but that's the idea of public education. You don't have to afford it.
Yeah.
It's
well, how would you organize public higher education?
Oh, I have not ever thought about that. No. My interest was in what you do to get people started. And if you there were kids that were so turned off. Mark Moncton was this kid's
you told us earlier in the podcast about Mark Moncton.
Yeah.
How he would fake his...
Oh, his mom said, when she came for the 9-week conference, and to come pick up the report card.
Yeah, you mentioned that earlier in the podcast.
I know.
That he would fake the sickness.
Oh, I'll tell you. His mom said, I've been dying to meet you. She said, Mark can be sick. And he will not stay home. He's going to school. And I said, well, I do think that the advantages that I had as a youngster myself, if I just kept that for me, then my education wasn't what it was touted to be. And the public right for a public education is fundamental, I think, in a democracy.
The only contention I have with that is that if I think The reason you don't understand what I'm saying is because you don't understand what public schools look like now. And public schools, they look like now, they're like robot facilities.
Okay, I think that would depend on what area you're speaking of.
Well, I can only speak for this area, but I'm sure it's the same in other areas.
No, you can't be sure of that because well, never mind.
For the most part, this is the trend in America.
Okay.
They're making it so that kids are churned out. STEM is emphasized. You know what STEM is?
Oh.
The focus on math and science. That's all you need to know.
Yeah.
And they're pushing that heavily on kids
and
across the United States.
It started with Sputnik.
Yep.
When the Russians got ahead, and we were, wide-eyed that they could possibly do such a thing, that put a demand.
And that's a perfect example. Now schools are entirely centralized. When I say I want to start a private school, the only reason I call it private is not because of the limitation of bringing kids into the school. I want it to be as open as it possibly can be. The reason I label it private is so that I don't have these regulations on my school. I don't want to make it a state school. I don't want it to be public.
Okay, but the legislature will have a lot to say about how divorced from investigation is the only word I can think of. But if there is a system that's going to present itself as being capable of taking people through the early learning years and on up through the PhD system and so on, that is going to call for all kinds of community dedication. Mm-hmm. And if I had not grown up basically on the campus of the University of Iowa, which was not a campus, it was many campi.
Campi?
Yeah.
Is that how you say it?
Yeah.
Campuses?
Uh-huh.
No, it's campuses.
Well,
it's funnier when you say campi. I'm going to start doing that.
Okay. Well.
The many campi of FIU.
But public education should be one of the most important things that a government takes on to do. Unfortunately, big money is always involved in education.
The thing with me is just I don't think highly centralized anything highly centralized, I don't think it functions well or properly.
I agree.
So I don't think that a state or especially the federal government should dictate how a school is supposed to be run or what standards it's supposed to meet. Maybe like one exam on basic fundamental things that you need to function in society. And you know what's funny? The tests they have now they involve higher levels of math, but not taxes. It's like, okay, so let me explain.
Yeah.
There's one standardized test called the SAT. It involves math questions that will only be used if you go into higher math courses, right? So people who go into the humanities will never have to take these maths. And my contention is, why do they need to learn that and not learn taxes? Because every American citizen has to pay taxes. And they should understand where their taxes are going, what percentages of their taxes are going to be taken, why this needs to happen.
Why are you assuming that isn't available?
I'm not assuming anything. I know for a fact it's not. Because I was raised, like I know what the school system asks for.
Remember that anybody speaking about education from an experiential point of view is limiting the validity of what they say to the community that they grew up in. And
well, the only contention I have with that is that nowadays things are way more centralized than they used to be. So I can really speak for places outside of where I live. because I know for a fact that they're governed by the same laws. And the SAT is a United States wide exam. It might even go past the United States. Well, I don't know. It has English, grammar, and math. So I'm assuming some, whatever. My point remains. I know for a fact everybody in the U.S. has to take a SAT in order to get into college, generally. There may be few exceptions. But other than, from Harvard to your local community college, you need to take the SAT. It's just it's a basic thing. Obviously, the score you get depends on where you go. You get a 900, which is a low score, you go to Miami-Dade College. You get a 1550, you go to Harvard. You get a 1600, you go to Harvard. 1600 is a perfect score. So my point remains, they ask you to do these kinds of math, but they don't ask you to do taxes. They don't teach you. First of all, in my whole high school experience, they did not teach me at all. First of all, they didn't teach me tax brackets. They didn't teach me where my taxes were going and what percentages were going where. They didn't teach me any of that. Or even the basic thing, how to file taxes. I was not taught any of this.
Yeah.
As an 18-year-old person who has a job, you're going to start paying taxes. And you should know how to pay them efficiently, properly. I don't think something like that should be trial by fire. You should know what you're doing a little bit.
I agree.
And I think a little bit of that should fall on the parents as well. You should teach your kids how to pay taxes. But
it depends on the lower the income of the family, the more hours that the parents are away from home, as a gross generalization. Yeah. And kids that don't have the advantage of encouragement at home are dependent on it.
On school, right?
At school in the early years, because.
What about in the later years?
Well, later, but we form our ideas or our concepts of
schemas.
Yeah, of things by our earliest experiences, ordinarily, and but when you have an extraordinary teacher or an extraordinary school board, then that's when you can just tell when public education has ranked very highly, it shows. And when it's ranked low,
you can tell.
Oh, I think that's just one of the most awful things that you can do in an area, is to have deficient education.
One thing I'm noticing more and more as I grow is the importance of school, but the importance of good school. That's as good as I can. That's as easily as I can put it. The things I've learned from people who, one thing I'll say before I go off on this tangent, is that schools now are departing further and further from fact and are becoming morally based. Now, having good morals is a very important thing in life, but good is dictated by the person. And that's the reason that schools shouldn't function based on morals. Because one person's morals is not another person's morals. And if we start deriving lessons and teaching kids certain things based off morals, they're going to lose sight of fact.
Okay,
and
I suggest that morals can't be confined to any particular segment of the...
No, I'm saying
well,
from...
And what it has, I think it has to do with the more open the classroom is to ideas. Like, I can remember if somebody started talking about something and they were way off, other kids might want to shush them, and I said, hey, we don't shush people in here, do we?
No, but you're proving my point. You want that objectiveness in the classroom. You want to be able to understand things from any angle. What I'm noticing more and more now in school is that things are taught from one perspective, and the perspective is biased. It can be very... You'll see this in history. They'll omit things that the U.S. did that was bad.
Oh, yeah.
But you'll also see that it's making... You'll see now, most history teachers don't feel good about America. They're saying America is a terrible place, basically, as they teach the lesson. Because America has done bad things, just like every other country, right?
Yeah.
But we kind of forget this, and we kind
It's
of
people that do the things. So we're talking about people who themselves have not had the enrichment that they so needed for the career they were going to follow.
Mm-hmm. So what's happening is that things are becoming increasingly one-sided. And I think if we were able to focus on facts, let me continue quickly. If we were able to focus on facts and truth and discernment of the truth, which is the most important part, being able to critically think about things, like that is what I want to focus on as when creating a school. That's what I want to provide for students. I want them to be able to.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. That is lacking in public schools. And let's say I go into a public school, I can make the difference that I make, but all the other teachers in the school are not like me, and they can't provide that thing. In a private school, I'd be able to ensure that me, all my board members, and my teachers, and the parents of the students understand this ideal that I want to provide kids with an unabashed, as objective as a human can get, perspective on the world. Forget all the biased textbooks leaving things out. Forget all this, forget all that. Do our best to tell the kids or to teach the kids how to critically think about the world and what happens in the world.
Yeah. That's a process, and you start by, in my opinion, by having an open dialogue at some time during the school day.
That's so true.
And I started out by having open dialogue for pretty much all day, every day, when I was there, because for one thing, I talked fast, and according, in comparison with the Oklahoma speech pattern, and I knew that they were going to have trouble understanding me and keeping up with me, and so it was very, very important that I do that, and I feel really good about how I invested things. I remember one little girl, I can't remember, she raised her hand, and I said, "Oh yeah. Everybody, you all know, don't you, that anytime you have something you want to say, right, wave at me or something." And she said, "When are we going to get our textbooks?" Yeah. I said, "Well, right now. Why not right now?" And I said, would you all like that?" And they all would like that. And I said, "Oh, there they sit, and I'm going on and on and on and on and on. And you guys, and now you tell me how you like to do it." And so I said something about, "I've been holding the floor here. Who wants to describe how it should be done?" And the kids almost always, if you put it open like that and start showing that you're addressing the class, then
they're all of equal importance.
Mm-hmm, yeah. And so after the kids got their textbooks, I said, now tell me what you want to do now. And let me just state that the reason I've been talking to you is that I come from a different part of the country. I talk much faster, and I wanted you to get used to the sound of my voice. And if I've succeeded in that already, then that's good. And I hope that you guys will be here every single day that you're not sick in bed. And because I have things to learn from you. And that's really,
that's amazing.
That's really important.
I think we should end it here.
Okay.
That's a good note to leave off on.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Thank you guys for listening to the special edition, the 22nd podcast of an Isaiah Desta Conversation. If you enjoyed, please leave a 5-star rating and a review. Have a nice day.